We have a React stateful component for our counter that tracks the state when you click, but we aren't handling clicks. In this step, we are going to simulate clicking in our tests without using a browser, and we're going to model event information in TypeScript interfaces. Let's start with a test. This is a copy of the first test, which gets the counter, checks to make sure it has its initial value, and then does this thing called simulate, which pretends to do a click on the fake DOM that we have inside the no browser DOM called JS DOM, and expects it to be a 1. Obviously, when I save and this test runs, it fails because we don't have anything handling the click, and this doesn't increment. So let's go and change our component to start implementing this event information. Scroll down to the div with the class name. I'm going to add an onClick handler. It's going to be an arrow function which calls setState and passes in a count which increments the existing count by 1. Not going to do any fancy operations on that. And now when I save, my tests actually pass. When the click event is simulated, it will actually call this click handler and set the state and increase the state. Now, we cheated a little bit because arrow functions in render are considered a performance problem. But worse, we can't really test this. We're doing logic in a place that isn't easily testable. Let's come out and let's take this state assignment. And let's make a method, or not actually a method, one of these things that we saw before that looks like a method, a property masquerading as a method that's an arrow function. And let's do our setting of state in there, and then this click handler becomes a lot simpler. And when I save, our tests still pass. Though our tests pass, we don't have the best type information. HandleClick is actually passed an event object. We can put this as the first argument, but then the TypeScript compiler complains and says we didn't put any type information. It implicitly has an any. Well, we could cheat and go ahead and tell the TypeScript compiler to shut up, but we're losing some information that we're going to need in this next step where we want to see if shift was pressed. So I'll take this off and I will say that this is actually a React mouse event that was targeted at an HTML element. And with this in place, my TypeScript compiler is a little bit happier. And my test still passed. Well, that was a lot of keystrokes, a lot of noise. Was it worth it? Let's put it to use on our way towards handling shift to advance by 10. First, we want to get the value to increment by. We'll say increment by 10 if the event has a shift key. If not, increment by 1. And then we will say we're going to increment the count by that value. Now we see the TypeScript compiler goes ahead and tells us that we're doing something wrong. We're trying to add a number and a Boolean. And that's because the shift key is actually a Boolean instead of a number. So the type information is already helping us. Let's try to make this explicit and say number. And that helps a little bit. It gets the error off of here up to the assignment, but we're just got the same problem. Boolean is not a valid variable. So it's a little bit closer. Now we can see that we have our actual error. It's a mistake we make all the time on the ternary operator. Let's shift this around and say if the event shift key is true, that's the Boolean. Make it a 10, otherwise make it a 1. Our TypeScript compiler errors have gone away. I save, but now our test fails. And that's because it needs information about the shift key in the object that's being passed in. We'll come over to where we're simulating this click event, and we're going to add the shift information, and we're going to say false. So in this case, We're just incrementing by 1. The user did not press the shift key. We want to clone this test so that we can then do a version of this test where it increments by 10. And this will be true. When I save, it should fail. It shouldn't wind up being 0. And it tells us that it actually got 10. So I will change that to 10 and my tests pass. And we did all of this without having to go over the browser, simulate the clicks all over the universe every time we make a change in our code.